It's a brand new week. The Easter chocolate has gone, the sun is out, the bikes are back on track, a whole new Speedway conversation to be had. Welcome back to 360 Speedway. Hello there, good to have your company as we head into episode 14. Thank you very much for tuning in. You are most welcome. No start line gardening from us. Let's get ourselves up to tapes, introducing this week's lineup of Speedway punditry excellence. Easter holiday means we're running with just the three of us this week, so we've got a rider replacement in operation. First up, we have we haven't seen him in quite some time, which makes it all more of a delight to reintroduce him to you again this week. He remains the rinkiest, dinkiest Pink Panther of them all, perhaps with the exception of Jamie Habin, of course. Welcome back to 360 Speedway for the first time in 2026. CJ, Carol Johnson. Good evening, Carol.
Evening, Derek. Evening, 360 viewers.
Great to have your company once again. Next up and completing this week's lineup, most definitely the housewife's favourite, and the blokes quite like him too, Emmerdale's biggest fan. Welcome back, Mr. Crabtree himself, Nigel. Hey, Nigel.
Hi, everybody. Good evening.
Collectively, this week's Handlebar Heroes. Usual disclaimer applies. All the views and opinions expressed are those of us as individuals and not necessarily any relation to any clubs, former or past, that we were or are associated to. You know, a year into 360, I've just about got that word perfect. And I say a year into 360 Speedway, remarkably, it's happy birthday to us. It's exactly 1 year since 360 Speedway launched, when I sheepishly looked into the camera for the very first time and waffled some lines of introduction. That was the 18th of April 2025, alongside our first ever set of Handlebar Heroes a year ago, where Stuart Robson, Stuart McDonald, who will be back very soon, and Ulrich Ostergaard, who's never been back on since, but would be very welcome, Uli, if you're watching. Listen, every single discussion that we've ever covered on 360 Speedway are saved for posterity even, saved for posterity, and all available to revisit and watch again via the 360 Speedway YouTube channel, or perhaps for the first time, if you weren't on board on those early days, you have hours and hours of some good quality Speedway discussions on a whole variety of different topics to have a browse at on our YouTube channel. Okay, so happy birthday to us. Look out for a celebratory post on our Facebook, Insta and TikTok accounts. We'd love for you to take a few seconds to comment and at least give us a loving happy birthday thumbs up when you see that. Okay, on with the action. Thanks once again to Lawrence Rogers for bringing us up to speed on all things Buxton Bulls on last week's episode. And thanks too for the various comments and on YouTube to our theory-based explanation as to why there are far fewer 10-plus riders in British Speedway these days. It was an interesting theory-based conversation, again, available to watch on YouTube. Right, big introduction to this week's episode then, episode 14, kicking things off with Fans Pulse Lap 1. This week we have a heightened interest to get behind the scenes of the newest senior club in British Speedway, the much talked about Premiership new boys, the Northampton Foxes. I love saying that, Northampton Foxes. Joining us for a bit of a chat on the eve of an historic campaign for Northampton Speedway, I am delighted to now welcome to 360 Speedway for the first time Fox's co-promoter, Tony Gaul. Hey, Tony.
Good evening, gents. Good evening.
Tony, I know you're an exceptionally busy man, and we're going to talk about the countdown to tapes up on a brand new era of Speedway at Northampton. But so really pleased to have your company, Tony. Thanks for coming on to share some of the information about all of the winter plotting and planning leading up to the launch of the Foxes. So let's start at the beginning, Tony, which is a good place to start. I know that Northampton Speedway isn't necessarily your first steps inside the wonderful world of Speedway. So for those watching or listening, please tell us, Tony, what is your involvement in all things Speedway up until now?
Well, around about 8 or 9 years ago, I started practice sessions on at Iowade Speedway with bringing the youngsters through. And on one of the occasions, Paul Hurry, who I knew very well, I attended on one of them with me, and I said to Paul Hurry, I said, Paul, you know, I need some help as to bring these youngsters on someone of a better level than myself, and agreed to help me and join, and we become a team almost. We putting practice sessions out there, and within a few months, it's very busy. We did 25-30 runnings every once a month. It was twice a month. And then with Scott Nichols, and we got together and discussed what further forward we could bring the Speedway. And Scott had an idea about why don't we get purchase some bikes out for people that possibly never rode a Speedway bike before, that we found they didn't know how to hire a bike or where to get into Speedway. So up to Martin Hagen's and bought a set of bikes off of Martin. And we set up Try Speedway, which is very successful. We're having lads from 5 and 6 year olds on little 50cc bikes, right up to gentlemen in their 70s. That's sort of one of the bucket list, always have a try on a Speedway bike. So it took off really well, and that's really current to where we are.
It's a much needed area of focus, Tony. We've talked quite a number of times on 360 about the dire need or the desperate need to encourage many more riders to try Speedway, and obviously to support and nurture them to try and carve out a racing career. So more power to your elbow at Try Speedway. Just going back to the Northampton. To Northampton Speedway, Tony. So you and your fellow promoter Paul Hunson, good evening Paul, if you're watching, both have quite a bit of support and backup, and as I understand it, from an as yet unnamed consortium. But my question really is, would it be fair to say that collectively, between you and Paul and the consortium, that there's lots of business acumen and inside Speedway knowledge, which will stand Northampton Speedway in very good stead, Tony?
Most certainly, yes. I mean, I would probably be the least of the consortium. I become very happy with Paul Cairns when we had young Will riding with us at practice schools years ago. And I got involved with a little bit of business. I own a timber and builders merchants, and Paul was involved with plasterboard. We sort of set up business with each other there, and I become pally with him over the years, and then obviously Paul got involved in as a promoter owner stuff, and so I've always kept a close contact there. And obviously when Birmingham unfortunately are going to be able to make it for this season, obviously the Speedway media, with only 5 teams, it wasn't going to work. And obviously I was concerned about that, because it's a shame to see that obviously with Peterborough, Wolverhampton, it's just a sad situation. And I'm chatting to many people in the background, to get this 16 together. I've never ever thought I'd be involved. And one afternoon Paul Cairns phoned me and said, look, Mark Lemon would like to have a chat with you about getting involved with a small consortium together to maybe get this 16 together at Northampton Shaleway, as it is. And we had a couple of meetings, 4 or 5 of us together. I knew Mark Lemon from Bellevue when I was doing the little practice days that he put on there, and I was riding. It was a bit of fun there. And during the meeting, after 2 or 3 occasions, I thought it was the right thing to do, get involved, and here we are today.
Carol, we haven't spoken to you, Carol, in a few months. Still, life gets in the way sometimes, so it's a genuine pleasure to have you back behind the 360 mic again, Carol. I imagine, Carol Johnson, you would much rather it was you and Peterborough who could come to tapes this season as the 6th club in the Premiership. But outside looking in, you must be pleased for the sake of the sport that the Premiership we've got a brand shiny new club in the sport, Carol.
Yeah, of course. So, we would have loved to have been at the tapes. In the next, it would have been this weekend just gone potentially. So yeah, disappointing that obviously we couldn't return, but fantastic that obviously Northampton that have come in. And I think obviously with Northampton being fairly local to us anyway, I think the supporters that refused to go to other tracks will wander over to Northampton. The supporters that I've spoken to, are quite keen to make the journey over. So, I think you'll get a Peterborough following there, which is good. I've always said, Peterborough, I think we've got the best supporters in British Speedway, home and away. And I'll stand by that. And if you can get half of them over to Northampton, it'll be superb. But yeah, having that extra team in, 5 teams was never going to work, was it? It was, not ideal. And, so that 6 team was always needed. And it was just a case of who was going to come in and take over. Now it's good. It's good for the sport in general that it's a new team, a brand new team, because that does help the likes of obviously us at Peterborough, Swindon, Lakeside, Coventry. It does help us in our fight against local councils, local developers, to say, look, there is new teams coming. It's not a dying sport. There is teams coming. There is new teams coming. So, it's certainly worth, revisiting some of the tracks that have closed down and getting them back up and running. And certainly, we're one of them.
I hadn't considered that, Carol. That the success of launching Speedway at a new venue at Northampton could be of planning benefit to Peterborough and other prospective clubs looking to come back into the sport. So there you are, Tony. It looks like you're going to have a whole bunch of Speedway starved Peterborough fans coming to take a look at Northampton. Tony, over the winter, were there times, Tony, where you allowed yourself to believe that it might just be too soon and too little time to deliver Northampton Foxes for 2026?
Well, that's a very good point. I mean, it wasn't until towards the end of February that it was all confirmed, and obviously it only gave us sort of 7 or 8 weeks to get the whole pack together, and it's a very short space of time. Obviously, then I visited the track to see the facilities and the refurbishment of what they've done at Northampton Shaleway, and walking around the facilities there with the hospitality suites, the grandstand, the bar area, and for the spectators on the bank bar verges, and there's a few good gantry viewing points. It was just absolutely perfect for Speedway. And with the adaptations that we're making now to make it work, it just couldn't be better. It then becomes just so exciting. This is a reality. You could have some really good Speedway. Hence, since that time, I'm actually there tomorrow in a meeting there tomorrow, just to see the progress once again, because obviously we've had to order air fences, and because it is a stock car track, we've had to, it wasn't a straightforward air fence, we've had to put some panels down the side, the foam panels down in certain areas that safe, obviously that being a number one, but it's all on order. That should be with us, I believe, to the end of next week. The pits area is being designed now, and hopefully that'll be ready next week. We're getting very, very close. As you quite rightly said, we've only had 7 or 8 weeks to get the whole package together, so it's not a lot of time, and the pressure's on, but we're getting there, and it's starting to progress. You can just start to see the light coming into the tunnel, so it's good.
It sounds like you and everyone else involved are relishing the challenge, Tony. To have it sounds like one of these TV programs where you've got 24 hours to create something or whatever. But we shared some photographs just as you were talking there, and the stadium, even in its current form, I think looks truly magnificent. It's going to be a wonderful venue to introduce to the wonderful world of Speedway. Tell us, Tony, you're talking about the stadium, and can you comment on what looks like a super positive relationship with Speedworth, who seem to be really quite buoyant and pleased to add Speedway to their motorsports disciplines?
Yes, well, Dean obviously owns Speedway. He was very keen when he was approached by Mark Lemon, and they got to, and he was very keen to have Speedway there. And it's sort of so quick, which you had to do. So the Speedway as a company, they're very excited about having Speedway. I met the stadium manager, and even the local resident had heard that we was popping down there from the Speedway. We didn't even publicise it. There was a few people outside when we arrived. Oh, are you from the Speedway? Oh, we can't wait for it to come back. I believe it. There hasn't really been the Flying Foxes, they were called, in the late 1950s, and I think there hasn't been anything since about 1962 on the Speedway side, I believe.
Wow. Yeah, it's certainly, you certainly got a big void to fill in. Northampton, I know, is a city, is a town who love their sport. Rugby being right up there, probably ahead of football. But to have another team sport and a motor sports team as well, I think will add something to the community. And we wish you nothing but success there. Hope you're enjoying the discussion out there. Regardless of how you are listening or watching, please do take a second, literally, to hit the little thumbs up button below. And it'd be cool if you could leave a comment too. All helps us genuinely to push out the channel on YouTube. Thank you. You've touched on the team name, Tony, the Foxes, and the sort of origin of that. What about the club colours? Orange and blue is quite a striking combination. It's an absolutely new one as far as I'm aware in Speedway. Where did that come from?
We were talking about the logos. Obviously, there was all talks about the badges. In fact, it was my wife Debbie. When Mark, in fact, I was running a practice session when he phoned me and said, "Look, we need to get a name, Northampton, and he put something out. And my wife said, "What about the Foxes? And Northampton Foxes, because if we get the youths there, they could be the Fox Clubs." So I like the idea of that, and we went forward with it.
Nigel, I want to bring in Nigel. We've been talking quite excitedly and very positively about all things Northampton, and as Tony, acknowledged, it's only 2 or 3 weeks ago that the news kind of broke. The team name, the team logo, Tony and Paul being named as co-promoters. We've now started to see photographs of track work and stadium work. The excitement's mounting, and the location, everything about that stadium and its geography, etc., deserves to have success, Nigel, doesn't it?
Well, it certainly does, doesn't it? First and foremost, it's not a dog stadium, it's not a football ground, it's a motorsport stadium, isn't it? Massive plus for Speedway, that, isn't it? Having a motorsport stadium there. You're not got your hands tied with other things, right? I know you have got cars and that there, but it's a motorsport stadium. I just think it's great news for Speedway, because this has probably been one of the worst winters we've had in Speedway for many a year. And then to come out in news like this, it's just, I think it must have perked everybody on the show with this as, and to see the pictures you were just putting on then, Derek, looks superb. Big track. They all say they want big tracks nowadays, big racing tracks. It looks that. So, again, another positive. It just looks awfully good, doesn't it? And as you say, everybody's got to wish them well and hopefully get good crowds and get on with it. You've lost nothing, haven't you? By not starting in March, you've not lost them. You start in May, quite easy. The better weather here, warm weather, and you've got plenty of time to run your seat from there. You've got time, are you? So I think you'll be fine. Oh, fingers crossed, everything will go really good for you. I hope it does.
Thanks, Nigel. To team matters, you mentioned it's only a handful of weeks ago, or February, when the green light was switched on to be able to make some announcements, and the commitment was there to go for it. But prior to that, in terms of talking to riders, potentially doing contracts and things, I imagine there must have been some difficulties and some constraints about what you were and weren't able to.
Well, that's right. I mean, ever since we are now we're coming together, the first thing obviously people want to know is what's the team. And Mark Lemon has really put a lot of work in behind to try to get some riders. I even heard on one of your shows a couple of weeks ago, Simon Lamb is saying, that he'd heard that we had approached a lot of British riders to come and ride for us. And it's absolutely correct. That was the case. Unfortunately, I think there were 6 or 7 that was approached. Very, very, very decent lads. But unfortunately, they declined for various reasons, which I'm not going to go into right now. But it's a shame that happened. But this was the very early stage of setting a team together. So they was approached, these lads, and as I say, for various reasons they didn't. So it left us to go outside Brits. So obviously, it's at that point, because all the teams have already set up by then, and the transfers have been made, the riders have already signed. And I'm not saying by any means that there has been reported that we had what's left. That's not necessarily the case. We still had a great choice of riders to choose from, but unfortunately a lot of them wasn't going to be British. So obviously Mark Lemon was heavily involved with discussing this with riders behind the scenes, and through numerous conversations with them, I think now we have a team that could be very competitive. Yeah, and in fact, I'm quite pleased with it, and as are everybody involved. On the basis of that, some people say they had their day, but these boys they've had their day, but these boys can reproduce. Some of these lads that we've got with us at the top of their game. And they're keen to get back into British Speedway and ride for a new club. Not just me, but the whole group of us are so excited about it. And I think we could surprise a few.
I think you've generally got a super interesting team, Tony. Your top 5. Yeah, I keep reminding myself that Troy Batchelor, who's been there and done it and got the T-shirt, isn't even in the top 4. And I understand it. So, he didn't start as a heat leader, is what I'm trying to say. But Troy Batchelor, is a capable rider. And then Luke Harrison and Kai Thompson, I think you might have 2 of the most exciting reserves in the whole Premiership.
Good, it's a very good point. I watched Kai Thompson. Scott was riding out in Australia, and there's 4 or 5 big meetings out there. And Jamie Lindsay was outstanding. I think out of 5 meetings, he won 3 meetings out there. I think he was in every final. Out of 5 meetings, he made every final. And obviously, with the averages they were sorted as regards Jamie, with the averages, obviously Belfie couldn't refuse or couldn't lose someone like Brunton or Dan Bewley. So with his improvement of average, he had to go. Well, it was what an opportunity for Northampton to grab someone of an up and coming, and I believe to be his GP level within a couple of years. He's improving so much, and for us to have him is an honour, really. And then we're talking about Kai Thompson. I watched it even the other night when in the Ben.
Yes,
we've got him on about 3.4 at the 6. I know a lot of Ben Funley testing out their body, but there was some good boys out there, Ben Funley. And if he didn't get excluded on one of his rides because his clutch had a problem coming out on the 2-minute warning, he scored 7 points on his 4 rides. 1 more point if he hadn't been excluded, he'd have been in the semi-final. So it's positives there. As you say about young Luke Harris, I remember him at Scunthorpe when I was still having a little spin on the amateur stuff, going around Scunthorpe. What great, look what he's done there. As a racing star, I don't think we could do much better there either. So, yeah, all good.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Tony, because I was for a little bit of fun, I was going to suggest to you that, if a rider's unavailable to you at any point this season or is sidelines temporarily, then you've got this guy that you can bring in. That's your good self, Tony. That's your good self. You've got a good style there, Tony Gaul.
Every day. He was a good photographer, I think.
and listen, so we've touched on the riders. What about your team manager? Chris Adams is stepping back into the breach, and I would imagine that Chris is going to bring to Northampton some recent experience as a team manager. You'll know all of the riders, including some of your top liners. Was that the thinking to get Chris involved in the sport again?
Yeah, exactly that. In fact, I haven't met him myself yet, but I've got a meeting tomorrow where I'm meeting Chris tomorrow around about midday. We've got a meeting at Northampton tomorrow. So it'd be nice to introduce myself to him and to understand it. I'm talking to Paul Hurry, Scott, and a few of the riders that I know. He'll do a great job, and I'm to meet him.
Chris, Carlo has mentioned already, there will be an appetite and a desire for Speedway fans all over the UK, regardless of where their home club might be or their hometown. I imagine that Speedway fans everywhere will be making a point this year of trying to drop into Northampton for the odd meeting. And I wondered, based on you've seen the track, you know the shape of it, you know the size of it, you know what it's going to look like ultimately. Can you preview how you think the Northampton track will perform? Can you liken it to another existing track to give people an idea of what to expect?
That's a very, very good point. I believe in the Premiership it was going to be the longest track. I think overall it's 394 metres, which exceeds even Kings Lynn. I walked the track 2 or 3 times last week. Now, it's a shame that we haven't had the time for our own riders to get the whole knowledge on the track, because it could be. Turns 1 and 2, going into turns, it's quite tight coming out, and being a very fast track, it could catch a few out. But yeah, I mean, a home advantage, nobody's going to have any home advantage, really, unless we can get some laps with our laps. But it's ups and the bikes. If we're trying, obviously, we've got to have a little mini meeting for the SCB to make sure it's working correctly. So they're going to be putting something on there in the next few weeks. And then obviously on press and practice day, we're having the day before our home meeting, which I think our first home meeting is on the 30th, Thursday of April. We're having a press and practice day on the 29th. So get these boys get plenty of laps in. Yeah, but technically it's going to be a fast and exciting track. And I believe that can bring plenty of passing. How many points it looks like from just looking around now. It could be very, very good race. And just there now, not right now, but he's been there today. And we're meeting tomorrow. There's been just a few changes to the track, because obviously with the stock car, you had like 3 foot where the white line would be. There was 2 or 3 foot. That's all been taken out and flattened out. And there's been some slight banking improvement on both corners. It's going to be a good race track. It should be a very exciting race.
So it's all very exciting, Tony. It genuinely is. Clearly, being in the Premiership, your race nights are going to align to the Premiership fixture calendar. But I just wondered, out of interest, would your terms of use with the landlord, would that allow Northampton potentially to race any on a number of days in any given week, or might there be? Do you have a sort of an idea of a default off race night?
Yeah, what's happened? Obviously, the Premiership is Mondays and Thursday nights. Us being predominantly on a Thursday evening, and they're okay to do. If there's a stock car meeting on the weekend, there Thursday night, then it's a job to take the air fence down straight after the meeting, which because of the amount of work involved in this particular air fence, it could take 3 or 4 hours to get down. So the boys will be working during the night. But if there's no stock car that weekend, then we can keep the fence up and we can do other things there. You know, down the line, I'd like to get me and Paul and Scott involved in running some training schools, getting the British kids used there and putting on some amateur meetings and making use of what time and what we can with the train, yeah.
And Tony, forgive me if this is already in the public domain. I was going to ask, when should supporters be able to access information on admission pricing and season tickets and car parking and practical things like that?
We had a Zoom meeting today for a couple of hours. I think I was trying to speak to you. I was trying to contact everything should be online, ready to purchase the tickets by the weekend. There will be obviously the tickets for the first week. There's going to be season tickets available. What is so good about Northampton is it's got 3 hospitality suites with gantries on turns 3 and 4. That's 2 beautiful hospitality suites with big gantries over like maybe 20 foot up, overlooking the track. It's wow, you know, for maybe for sponsors, people who like an upgrade from standing or sitting grass patches.
Yeah.
The new stand that they've got holds 780 people, and there's not a bad seat in that stand. I walked into that stand and sat down in it last week. It's a tremendous viewing stand. So yeah, from the facility side, it generally could not be better.
Second to none. Tony, I know everything very fast and furious, and your focus will absolutely be on the opening meeting for very obvious reasons. But I wonder if I can throw a curveball question at you. In your own view, Tony, what does success look like in this first season for Northampton Foxes?
Well, I think it's like for any team. I think, well, let's say Ipswich, any Premiership club. Obviously, I've got a fan base. They know roughly what their gate's going to be to work out on their budget and their business plan. What will break you even. I mean, this is a completely new example, so we can hope that we get good gates because obviously it needs to work. On the funding of it, there's a few of us put the money into. We're not silly. It's going to go and make. If anybody thinks that they're going to put money into Speedway and do very well out of it, don't invest money in it. But the idea is behind it. If it breaks even, it needs to break even like any business. So before you don't talk about profits, it needs to cut off. So the overheads. It needs a decent crowd, and hopefully we can get that to be able to make it a success.
Well, listen, Tony. Listen, like I said at the top of the call, I know you're a busy gent these days. So thank you very much for giving up some time to speak to us on 360 Speedway. I just want to echo, I think, what the whole British Speedway community are thinking, and Nigel and Carl have mentioned it already. Northampton Foxes are a much needed and super important new piece to the British Speedway jigsaw, and we as in supporters of all clubs only wish you the best, Tony. No any axe to grind with anyone involved in Northampton Speedway, and we're super pleased to have that 6th club in the top flight of British Speedway, and we can only extend our best wishes for the season ahead. And hopefully, Tony, you can come back on in a few months' time and give us an update on how things are going.
I certainly would like to do that. And thanks for having me on tonight. And I hope to see many people there on our first meeting on 8:30. Thanks very much.
Please stay with us for France Paul's Lap 2, which will auto start shortly. No need to do anything. We will be discussing insurance is premium.